Hi everybody. Today is an introductory to sourdough bread making. I wanted to show you some of the materials that you may want to buy if you're interested in starting making your own sourdough at home. So I made a list so that I don't forget anything, but I'm going to put them in front of the camera so you can see what each of the items looks like. You might want to have a pencil and paper ready to write the items down as I show them. So, starting with the supplies. One of the things that I had to actually buy was a large glass bowl. I almost always make double batch of bread. So this one fits 2 loaves. I can mix 2 in here. Or you could have another glass bowl that's a little bit smaller. You can see the difference. And this would have enough room to mix 1. Now I say glass bowls and preferably a clear glass bowl because as the sourdough ferments and grows, you will see bubbles, and it's nice to be able to see underneath all the bubbles that are forming. But I know I've seen a lot of people online that use plastic bowls. They're just lighter so that when you're doing some of the stretching and the kneading of the dough, they don't stay on the counter. They lift up with the dough. So I like a heavier bowl. The problem with the glass bowls is I've already broken 2 of them in my kitchen. So that's why the plastic bowls are nice. And then some people use a stainless steel bowl, and that works also. The next thing I wrote down is something called a Danish dough whisk. Danish dough whisk. So I have 2 of them. This one's a little bit smaller, but when you mix in the flour into the water and the starter, then I mix it with this and it mixes up real well. So these are called a Danish dough whisk. If you don't want to buy something, you can use a fork. Okay, a bowl scraper or a bench scraper. Sorry, I keep saying the words when I'm not looking at the camera. Bowl scraper, bench scraper. This is the bowl scraper. And when you're mixing your dough, you can scrape and flip the dough over like this. It just really helps when you're trying to move the dough around without having to grab it. You can scrape every last bit of the dough out of the bowl. I love this. I use these all the time. And then this is called a bench scraper. And this isn't for scraping in the bowls because it's not the right shape. It's a little bit sharper, but I use this to cut the dough whenever I need to cut it. So for example, I might have a big glob of dough for 2 loaves, and then I want to cut it and split it into 2. Another way I use it is when I'm cutting the scones into pieces, and then I use it when I'm cutting a big glob of dough into bagel size shapes. Those I use a lot, but you know, you can use something else. You could use a knife to cut the dough instead of this one. And if you have a really sturdy spatula, you could use that instead of that. The next thing I have is a digital scale. You have to have this. This is a digital scale. It measures grams. Everything with sourdough related to sourdough is measured in grams. And I can even put that very heavy glass bowl on this and it's accurate. So you do need one of these. Fortunately, I've already owned one of these because I've been on enough diets in my life, let me tell you, where I've had to measure my food. So I already had one of these, but if you don't have one, they're not that expensive. You can get them on Amazon or at Walmart. Okay, this one's kind of silly, but this one's plastic shower caps. I just buy these because they're so much easier to use when you want to cover your bowl. You just open them up, put them over the top, and they attach to the bowl when you want to cover the bowl while your sourdough is fermenting and growing, or after you roll it up and you're putting it in the refrigerator for the cold portion. You can put this right over the top and it just makes life easier. But of course you can use plastic wrap instead. And another option is to use a tea towel here. just a regular cotton tea towel. Some people make it a little bit damp and then they lay that over the top of their bowl. Some people put it inside a bowl and put the sourdough on top of it instead of a banneton, which I'll show you in just a second. I use, to grow my starter, a wide mouth glass jar. After my starter is already growing, it gets all crusted up like this and it looks like this, but I like this wide mouth because then I can reach in there and stir it easier, and then it pours really easily. When it's clean, it looks like this. And this is actually the brand called a Weck jar. And I have a lot of these, but you can also just use a canning jar. They just have a smaller mouth on them, but I've used all different kinds of jars, and this just happens to be my favorite. A long-handled spatula works the best for stirring because it reaches all the way to the bottom of the jar really easily. So I just got this at Walmart. This one works. I like this one because it's a little bit firmer. This one's kind of bendy. So this one, when the starter gets thick, this one is a little bit better than this one, but I like how this one has the longer handle. Some people you will see online, they use a wooden dowel type of thing. They call it a spurtle, rhymes with turtle, and it's made out of wood, and that's what they stir their starter with. I just never bought one of those. Banneton baskets. So after you mix your sourdough and you roll it up into the shape of the loaf, you plunk them in a banneton basket, and I actually don't really know what these are made out of, some kind of wood. And this one is in the shape of a bread loaf, and then this one is the shape of more like the round loaf. I only owned these to start with because I thought the round loaves were so pretty. And then I realized that a lot of people like the bread loaf shape because they can slice it easier into bread for like a sandwich. They come with this on them. It's a cotton cloth. And then some people put their dough right on top of here and put it in the refrigerator for the cold portion. But I like it when I take these out because I like it when they have the lines on the loaf. Just looks prettier to me. But then, you know, this is kind of gunked up and you have to get a brush to scrape it out and scrub it out. So these are banneton baskets. I own several of them just because sometimes I make 3 or 4 loaves of bread at once. Let's see. Oh, a bread lame. It's spelled L-A-M-E, so I always want to say bread lame, but I actually had to look it up. It's a bread lame. And this is just a razor blade attached to this handle, and it's for scoring your bread. When you make a loaf of sourdough, you do have to cut a line across the top, which I will show you in upcoming videos, because as sourdough bakes, it has to expand. And if you don't make the cut or score it in the top, then it can explode. It can just burst open. So you have to allow that expansion score. And then some people that are super creative, they make the little wheat stalks and they make the decorative parts of their sourdough with that. Dutch oven. So in the beginning, I only used this to bake the bread, and you just put the bread right in there and put it in your oven. My oven is very small, so I could only make 1 loaf at a time if I used this. But then I watched some videos where people were making the bread loaf shape, and they use just a regular bread pan like you would make banana bread, and then you put your sourdough in one, and then you cover it with, so you're using two. So the cover is a second bread loaf pan, and that mimics what this would be like with this lid. So I can fit 3 or 4 of those at once into the oven. So that just makes it a little bit more convenient when people are trying to make more loaves. And then also I can make one round and then put the bread loaf pan next to this. So then I can make one round, one bread loaf at the same time. So this is 5 to 6 quart. This one might be a 6-quart Dutch oven. And these would be more expensive to buy than if you just bought the bread loaf pan. But I think you can do it as small as a 5-quart or as large as a 6-quart for making sourdough for the Dutch oven. Parchment paper is what I use so that the bread doesn't stick. Some people use a silicone bread. Do you say silicone or silicon? I don't know. Silicone bread sling, it's called. And they plunk their bread dough right on there and lower it into the Dutch oven or into the bread pans. But I always use parchment paper. The last thing I have for supplies is something that I need, but not everybody would need. I figured this out in the middle of the winter that I need a heating pad. What I do is when I'm trying to grow my starter or grow the dough, it has to sit for a long time, depending on the temperature. And I will attach some charts that tell you, according to the temperature in your home and according to the temperature. Hi, Jack. Beware. According to the temperature of your dough, tells you how long you have to let your dough ferment. So my house is cold. I have people that need a cold house, whether it's in the winter or whether it's in the summer. It's always about 68 to 70 degrees in my house, which means it could take 12 hours for my sourdough to be ready to bake. I couldn't wait that long, and it didn't always even grow at all. So I did buy one of these on Amazon, and every night when I feed my sourdough starter, I put it on this warming mat. And if I set the warming mat to about 92 or 93 degrees, the starter gets warm enough that it actually grows. If I do the same thing with the dough, it actually grows enough for me to bake it. So you may be living in a house where you need to have a warming mat, but otherwise, if you have a house that's more like about 72 to 75, it may take more like about 6 hours, 6 to 8. But mine with the warming mat, I can usually have it ready in about 5 hours. So, and then overnight for the starter. I actually have 2 of these. So those are the supplies, and what I did to start is I went on Amazon and I ordered a sourdough making kit. And then I kind of just added on as I went along. I didn't own everything to start because I didn't even know if it was something that I wanted to do all the time. But I just kind of added on as I went along because there are other things that you can use instead of these more official sourdough making things. So as far as ingredients, this is the good news. You don't need to buy very many ingredients to make a loaf of sourdough. So I feel like first off and most important is you have to buy a good quality flour. And this is the flour that I always get. It's called King Arthur bread flour, and it has to say unbleached. And then in the corner, it shows the percent of protein in the flour. And to have a good quality flour, it should be about 12.7%. I know there's some that people buy at Costco, and I think it's actually an unbleached AP flour, which a lot of people online use to make sourdough. And it's in a green and white bag like this. and it's a little bit cheaper than this one. But I honestly buy this at Walmart, and it's maybe like $5.50 for a bag of this flour. But since you only need flour and water and salt to make sourdough, it's really not that big of a deal to pay that. Let's see. For the salt, I use this Himalayan pink salt. Looks like this. It's a coarser salt, and you can use any salt you want. I've seen a lot of people just use regular table salt, but I did read somewhere that you're not supposed to use salt that's iodized salt. I always just buy this, and again, I can buy it at Walmart. You only need about 10 grams for every loaf of bread you make, so maybe this is $6 for this whole bag, but it lasts a long time. And then I use it in everything I make. The cookies, the scones, the bagels. So I really like this. It works really well for me to use the pink salt. And then this is also really important. I goofed up at first with this one. You have to use spring water. So I guess some people have a pitcher at home with a filter on it, and they fill that up from their faucet, and then it's filtered water, and that works. I just buy a big jug of spring water. Again, it's not expensive to buy. And I buy this at Walmart too. So what I do is I just fill out one of those drive up Walmart things online, and I order this, I order this, I order this, I drive in, pick it up. It just makes it so much easier. But I do know I've seen all of the same ingredients at festivals, so I'm sure they have it at Woodman's, any kind of grocery store. This is not hard to find. And they also have it at Sam's, and I heard they started selling this at Costco also. So if you're a Costco or a Sam's person, you could probably find all of this there. One extra thing that I buy is this rice flour. And again, I get it at Walmart. But this is not used in the baking portion. But if you've ever seen some of the loaves I make, or some of the loaves that people make online, they sprinkle the top of the loaf when they're doing that cutting and putting it in the oven to bake it. And it stays white. So then it has that contrast between the crust of the bread and then the white of this flour. And it just looks really pretty when you take the loaf out. So that's what this is for. Also, I spread it on the counter when I'm dumping the dough out, and then it doesn't stick to the counter. And it's just a different flour than this, and it works really well for different situations. This rice flour is a little bit more expensive, but you just don't use very much of it. I think I have everything. I did buy a little shaker so that when I'm shaking the rice flour on, that's really helpful to have. And let's see if I remembered everything. Oh, your hands get super messy when you're making sourdough, so I always wear these gloves, and I've gotten to the point where even if I'm just making a loaf for my family, I always wear these gloves because otherwise I walked around with flour and crusty starter. I felt like I always had it stuck to my hands, and I was constantly washing my hands, and you know, in Wisconsin winters, your hands can get so dry. So I do have gloves that I always wear. Okay, I know that seems like a lot. You can go back and rewatch and write down the things that you need just to get started. And once I start making the instructional videos on how to make the sourdough, then you'll see exactly what you feel like you will need to start. For example, I don't know if I mentioned this, but instead of a Banneton basket, you can just use any bowl, line it with a tea towel, and put your dough in there, and then cover it with plastic wrap. So in the beginning, I didn't have all of these materials. I didn't buy it all right away. So just know that you can do this in a very simple way too. Please, please, please message me if you have any questions. That's what I'm here to help you with. And good luck. I hope some of you join me along the way.